All right, so welcome to OKSL's learning module. Our series is titled Building a School Library Collection, and our first session in the series is kind of a broad overview titled Collection Development and Management. Building a School Library Collection. And we have two speakers here. We have two school librarians from the Tulsa area. First, we have Michelle McCain, who is going to be speaking to you. She is from,
Trace Academy.
Trace Academy, Tulsa Public Schools. And then we also have Lisa Rowland, who is from Jinx Public Schools, and they can tell you a little bit more about each of their building sites when they speak. So before we turn it over to them, just a quick disclaimer about OLA and OKSL, since we are hosting this session. The views, policies, and actions expressed by our two speakers during this presentation are those of the speakers and do not imply the expression or opinion of OKSL or OLA. And so this presentation is not intended to provide any legal advice. So if you are seeking legal advice, we suggest you go to your administration, your school district, your school board, someone that is there to represent you or your school district. So without further ado, Michelle, I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. So my name is Michelle McCain, and I am at Trace Academy in Tulsa Public Schools, which is a pretty small school. We only have at the moment about 56 students, 6 through 12. And we're an alternative setting. So students who have gotten suspended, had troubles at their school, they'll get sent to us for like a 9 to 18 week period. So my library is very small. It's about the size of like a large classroom. And my collection at the moment is just under 3,000. This is my first year there. Prior to that, I've been at some other schools with significantly larger collections, but that's where I am now. So the biggest thing that I had a struggle with when I first started was trying to understand like what part of collection development I was supposed to look at first. Should I go through and get rid of all these old books? Should I start ordering all these new things? And so for me, the thing that I kind of keep central is what is the purpose of my collection and the purpose of my library? And within the schools that I've been in, I tend to focus more on the leisurely piece of reading, just because we do have some really great curriculum supports and things like that. So I lean a little bit more towards leisure, but knowing what your students, your staff, and your community may be looking for, and whether or not you're going to be open to the community. I've not made a big effort to include my community, but technically I do allow for parents or family members to check out. I also don't charge any fees or anything like that, so I don't worry about that when I made that decision. And so with students, though, there's the leisurely reading, your curriculum supports. Please stop me if I'm going too fast. Sometimes I talk really fast and I'm aware. So just say hey. If they need to do any type of research, even though I know we tend to, especially the kids tend to default to like online research, sometimes having some good books in your library, some broad things, or just some things where the kids happen across topics that they may not necessarily find are really good. And then also too, I have almost always had a few kids who come in and are like, I want to know about this, and they want everything in the world about it. So I try to look for kind of the hot topics that I hear kids talking about and making sure to ensure that I have those things in my collection or something related to them. General topics like how the government works, money management things, since I'm in secondary. I also have like cookbooks and those sorts of things that are more broad that kids just may want to look at here and there. And that's kind of how I start looking at what the purpose of my collection is. What is it going to be for? And so that varies, from school to school and even year to year sometimes. So you'll have to reevaluate that. Some things that I also consider in my ordering is my funding. How much am I going to get and what are the conditions? For me personally, the majority of my books are purchased through bond funds. And because I'm using bond funds, anything that we purchase has to last the life of the bond, which for us is 5 years. I can, on a limited basis, order paperback books, but primarily I'm expected to order hardback or library bound books, just because paperback books are considered to be consumables. And they definitely, in a school library setting or any library setting, they definitely are. They're not going to last near as long the more people are using them and pulling them on and off the shelf. Also, your vendors that you have approved, we have two main vendors, Permabound and Follett, that we order from. And then there are some other smaller vendors that we're allowed to order from. And so that's a big consideration. If I can't get the book through my vendor, then I'm not going to be able to use my bond money anyway, and I'm not going to purchase it out of pocket. So I don't want to spend a lot of time looking for books that I can't get. I really prefer, of the two, I do a lot more of my ordering from Permabound, but again, that changes year to year, just depending on what's available. And then to me, the big thing is processing options. I got some books over the summer this year that were not processed because of all of the delays due to COVID and stuff like that. So they sent them to me unprocessed, which meant that I had to put all of the stickers and spine labels and barcodes and label protectors on. And when you have a small library where you're only ordering a little bit, that's not a big deal. When you get 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 boxes of books, that is a lot of work to do. And so knowing what your processing option is a really important one. Also just space. And I should have included this as kind of a bullet under that, not just the space on your shelves, but also like the sizing of the book. Be very careful not to order books that are this big or rather large books, which I have done a few times. I'll get a like 3 or 4 inch book, which is not bad, but it disappears on the shelf. Or I've had books that just don't fit on the shelf, and then you have to shuffle and find some place for them to go. What is your circulation? What's popular? What's collecting dust? 3 years ago, I took over a library space that was packed full of books. I mean, it was amazing the number of books that we had. And then I dove into the collection and realized nobody's checking these out. And in fact, I was pulling out brand new books that were over 20 years old. The spines had never been touched because it was just overwhelming to students. There was too much of a selection, especially in nonfiction. They were looking at just a wall of books, and how do you choose when you have, I think we had over 25,000 books. It was way too many. And we had a population of about like 550. And so I ended up getting rid of like 13,000 books just to make it accessible for students. So that's important. Also to not only circulation, as far as like numbers, but sometimes we get caught up in the books that we like or that are classics or are really well reviewed. And so if you have a series, for example, that students are only checking out the first one, you may love that series and it may be really popular in the local public library, but for some reason your students aren't enjoying it. So do you hold on to an 8 book set, or do you get rid of it? And so those are decisions you'll have to make. A big one is the policies, now including the state policies like 1775, but again, that varies. And then it's not just about your policies, it's also about like what policies your district and your principal are going to really understand and support you on. I know a lot of library policies are written with a little bit of vagueness in them to allow librarians to make decisions on what is appropriate, as they should be. But that's one of those weaknesses that outsiders could latch onto that can cause issues with things like 1775. Awards and reviews. I usually will order the entire Sequoia list for the level of my site, unless I have seen that 1 or 2 books have been kind of lukewarm in other places, and then I may hold off just as a budgeting decision. But typically I'm ordering the entire set of Sequoia books. I've had years where I order like 3 copies because I was able to get them out, and other years where I realized I might as well just order 1 because the kids do not care if it is a Sequoia book or for example, if there are a few novels in verse, those have not been as popular in my schools. So I definitely don't get numerous copies of those. And the reviews are just individual and professional reviews. And I feel like I have word vomited to you guys. So I'm going to take a breath and just ask, are there any questions or concerns, comments? Okay. Just let me know. I love talking to kids, but I get very antsy talking amongst peers. So
I have a quick question, if you don't mind me jumping in. I just thought it was interesting, the books in verse, you said your students were not interested in those. Have you had conversations with your students about those?
We have talked about them, and I try to remember to include them in different activities that we do. Like last week, we did an activity where students were basically judging books by front cover, back cover, and first 2 pages. And so I included some novels in verse. I've had some kids that specifically request that. That's what they want. But I think for a lot of our students, they're just not quite sure how to follow them, which I kind of understand because I enjoy some of them, but I do sometimes struggle to stay engaged. So we talk about them. I put them in book displays. I give them opportunities to interact with them. Certainly during any poetry work that teachers are doing, I try to pull them out, but they just have really had like a lukewarm reception. They have not been very popular with students.
Interesting.
If I can jump in. So with free verse, one of our big issues was just kids finding them on the shelves. And do we want to genre tag them as that or the genre that they might be in? So if you're familiar with Destiny, if that's what your library uses, there is a collections option. And I found by putting them into a collection where they can go search online and read a little bit more about them, those kids that really latch on to them, because some of our teachers do require them to read one throughout the year, it lets them search for them and really just go through them. And then others may never read one after a long way down. But that's been a useful tool for my students on how to find some of those.
Oh, that's awesome. I need to work on bumping up my collections in Destiny. So I'm glad that you pointed that out. Ellie, I just saw your question. Do you mean of the books in verse? So A Long Way Down is one, and I've now gone to, there was another one. Lisa, do you have one off the top of your head? Because now my mind has completely gone blank. Oh, Street Love by Walter Dean Myers is another one.
5 to 1 is a dual narrative, or one point of view is in free verse and the other is a narrative. There was also one on the Sequoia list. It has Truth in the Title from, I think, 2 years ago by Medema. There's a big variety. The Seventh Raven is one of the few ones that's not realistic or historical fiction. There's quite a few, but again, they can be difficult to find on the shelves because they look just like any other book from the outside. And so sometimes one of those conversation pieces is too, when I have kids that are wanting short books, is I know this can look like a long book and maybe a little bit intimidating, but if we open it up and you see the words on the page, it kind of lessens that load. But again, it can be a little odd to follow. So it depends on if they like that form of prose.
And Kwame Alexander writes several as well. And those are actually pretty popular. Those are probably the most popular books in verse that I've dealt with, at least in the last couple of years. I'm sorry.
Ellie, I think, is an elementary school librarian.
Oh.
And yeah, so she may not be familiar with a lot of the ones, or need a lot of the ones that you mentioned, but
Gotcha.
like Inside Out and Back Again is a really popular one. On the intermediate list, for the 23 intermediate Sequoia list, Alone is one. I'm trying to think if there's another one that was looking at, see. I think Alone was the only one that was on there, but there's quite a few of them. There's usually at least one that makes the intermediate or the Sequoia list. So,
and Yeah, full disclaimer, I am secondary and very far out of touch with the elementary books and selection. So I will try to be mindful of that and give you what little I do know about elementaries. This is part of the TPS district policy. And if you go and pull up our district policies, something that I've actually been talking to my library manager and have actually even mentioned to the superintendent is our policy that says library medias is actually blank. That's the 3200s. And instead we have our policies are kind of split up. So one of them talks about what the selection process is like, what the objectives are, supporting the curriculum, providing equitable access, reflecting all sides of issues and beliefs and ideas, and then popular materials. And that's something that those are pretty good baseline objectives for your library that kind of go back to what I talked about at the beginning. One of the important ones is the reflect all sides of issues. So I have had a library collection where I had like 12 different versions of the Bible in the religion section. And then I had almost I had no like actual nonfiction books just about the religion. And I had very few books about any other belief systems. So I pulled several of those Bibles. Many of them were redundant anyway. They weren't like different versions. So I pulled several of those and I had a teacher question of like, well, why would you take that out? They're really good. And I'm like, I will offer them to the students. Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with the books, but I need to balance the collection. And because of my budget, I'm only going to be able to order a few books. I'm not going to be able to order 16 to level this out. So instead I will weed some of these, keep the newer, better condition and more appropriate for students books. And then I will add some additional books. I've also found other issues where I can't find a book that gives any other perspective. And so then I've passed on that book. It's been a few years since I've had that issue. Opposing viewpoints is a pretty popular thing at the moment. It seems like everybody wants to have their version, so it's been a lot easier to find those things. These are the criteria that I am to use during my collection development. And these are essentially the things that I can use to defend my choices. So when I'm selecting books, these are the things that I'm keeping in mind. Anything that, like if there are books that the district has as required reading, I feel very comfortable and confident in getting those because the district is requiring them as well. So it makes sense that they would be in my library as long as they're still appropriate to the grade level. If I can find really strong support in reviews and awards and literary merit, that's another thing that I add in. Authority and accuracy with fiction sometimes becomes a little bit more broad because you're, telling a made up story, but I do try to be aware of people speaking in their own voice and those sorts of things a lot more. And with the diversity of books increasing, that's become easier to find perspectives in those native voices. Diversity is kind of a hard one with 1775 and the way that can be twisted. However, if I am able to look at everything else in this list and it fits, then I feel comfortable and confident in selecting it. I also want to disclaim that I definitely understand people who are a little bit more hesitant. I just am more willing to put myself out there if need be. And so I know that for some people, they're going to be much more conservative in their book selection, and that's fine. My population, I forget what it is in my current school, but my previous school was 92% non-white. So there was a very big need for diverse books. And so that is what was my rationale and defense for any pushback on the selection of books that I had. The format of books for me primarily has been physical books. We've done ebooks and we have ebooks available. They're not as popular. I've had very few kids that really want to engage with them. That could be in part from our limited selection, just because we're not able to carry as many ebooks as, say, the public library. But the challenges and concerns, Oh, see, I made a typo. If you guys were my students, you could call it out and get points. These are the kind of challenges and concerns that come up in the books that we are picking. These are the things being talked about in school board meetings and that sort of thing. I included romance in here specifically because of the new law that came effective November 1st about pornographic materials, and how even just those childhood romances can kind of be twisted and have to be looked at. I have very rarely pulled a book because I thought that it would be problematic or in violation of anything. I think I've only done one, and that was the graphic novel of Game of Thrones. And I was like, well, I don't feel like defending this one. I probably could, but I've seen the show. I don't want to read the book, and it's just not that valuable. So I removed that. Otherwise, I haven't had to remove any books based on this, and I haven't had any challenges in my own library. As a district, we have 2 challenges, I think, that are pending right now. Those were for Flamer and Genderqueer, the books that were being brought up this summer. Those were actually not even challenged by community members. Those were employees that challenged them just to have them reviewed. So those were all internal. Last year, we had 2 or 3 book challenges based on LGBTQIA plus content. And the year before that, we had an internal challenge for the 6 Dr. Seuss books that were no longer going to be published. And again, that was an internal one. I was on that committee, and we ended up deciding to remove them from our collection. Primarily just because there was not really a big reason to keep them. They were very low circulated. They weren't in the greatest condition, and there were better options out there. One argument that was made was about using it as an example, but we felt like there were other options for being able to show that type of issue without just leaving the books on the shelf. And we also did not have the staffing to put them in like a special collection and ensure that, like, if somebody was checking them out, that that's what they were checking it out for. So that's what we decided. But these are the main things that are talked about at our school board meetings. I've been going to most of them lately, so I've heard these things. The arguments don't typically have a whole lot of depth behind them, other than to just say, like, I don't like this and I'm uncomfortable with this. But there's always like kind of a counter argument. There's no real like clear right or wrong, I guess, which is why I would like to see, if you really have an issue, more of those challenges, so then the committee can decide and it can be out of our hands. But these are the primary things. I have not gotten any like personal complaints it's been probably 4 or 5 years, and the complaint was that there was a penis joke, and when I called the parent back, they never returned my call, so that didn't go anywhere. And then best protection for kind of the issues with our collections is knowing your rules and policies, know your community, have a strong rationale for your collection, if it's following those policies and procedures and you can defend it. And if possible, join your union just so you have that additional protection. And the last thing that I'm going to leave you guys with is, this was kind of the best statement that I heard whenever I started out and I was really overwhelmed about my collection. We're not book museums. So if the book isn't being used, even if you love it and the whole school loves it, but nobody checks it out, there's no reason to keep it. Obviously, do your due diligence and promote the book and that sort of thing. But I heard this and it was like, oh, mind blown. Okay, I don't have to hoard all of the library books. I can let them go. So if there are any questions or discussion, I'm happy to answer. All righty. Well, I was either really, really good at my presentation, or nobody was listening, or somewhere in between. And I'm going to choose to believe that I was just amazing at presenting, and you guys are all in awe of my knowledge.
I'm going to agree with you that you were amazing. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Lisa. Thank you so much, Michelle.
All right, sorry, I started screen sharing and then it would not let me click my microphone on. So that was on me. Sorry about that. So let me get this a little more full screen here. All right, so I'm Lisa Rowland. I'm at the Freshman Academy at Jinx. So we have a little over 900 students. We are on the same physical campus as our high school. So sometimes we do have high schoolers that come over either because they may have an elective or an ELL class here, or just because they really miss us and they want to come see us or grab something from our collection. So we have about just a few quick demographics. I think we're about 49% white, and then a lot of diversity. Otherwise, we have more recently refugees from Afghanistan. We've also have a fairly large Burmese population, and just a lot of variety here at Jinx. So I have about a little less than 11,000 books, and that has definitely changed more recently. When I got here, I definitely had a lot of nonfiction as well. I kind of followed someone that was their passion, and so now I have, so we've changed quite a bit, and I think you'll see that in some of the later slides. So just to start things off, we have our board policy. We also do not have like a super set collection development policy. We do have our selection policy, which has some very similar language about various points of view being addressed without regard to origin, background, or views of those contributing. We also, when we select materials, need to have multiple professional reviews. So we tend to read that as 2 or more. And then also there is some, a little bit of leeway just with materials that may not have reviews, that they can be previewed. And so that's typically in place for things like DVDs, but has also definitely come into play with graphic novels, because a lot of those do not get professional reviews or have professional reviews on the first volume. So one of the first things for me with thinking about developing a collection is just, what role does your library play? And I think this is one of those factors where you can't just jump into a library and start immediately changing everything. Knowing your site and everything that's going on there may be a really good reason why you have a huge collection of memoirs if teachers are really teaching into that. So I think sometimes it's a good idea to take a step back and just think, okay, where is my library at? What is it like in my school? And so for me, we have a lot of student choice in our classrooms. So they do maybe 1 or 2 whole class books, like a year, honestly. They may not even do 2 a year. Mostly our students just have a free choice book that they're reading, and they may do 1 or 2 book clubs a year as well, but a lot of free choice. There's also a lot of really huge classroom libraries. So between those two, we need a lot of variety for our students to choose from. And also we need a lot of really high interest things. When I'm talking about large classroom libraries, I'm talking about 1,500 plus books per classroom. So I'm really looking at those high interest books and formats that are going to bring the students into the library. Which means a lot of graphic novels, which happens to also be a passion, so that's helpful. And then when we're talking about nonfiction, a lot of really high interest things. Also with nonfiction, we have a few different databases, some that we subscribe to, and then also the Oklahoma Departments of Libraries provides EBSCO, so you may be familiar with that. So we have a lot of really quality resources when it comes to research. So a lot of our nonfiction collection here is really geared towards what are the students going to want to read. So those sports books, those books on World War II, Guinness Book of World Records. I mean, that's a lot of what we cover, and we try to have a variety and things for all manner of kids, but we really focus in on high interest. Also, we just have a different group of kids every single year with being a freshman academy with only one grade level. So from year to year, things kind of tweak to meet the needs of our kids. Some years they're really into Star Wars, and then for 5 years they won't be into Star Wars that much. And so, you know, we're just going to try to adapt with the needs that we see with our students every year. And then the other thing about building a collection is you really need to know what you're starting with. And so getting to know your collection. So we have a couple of tools on the next 2 pages. This first one is Tidal Wave. So it's put out from Follett. If you have Destiny, there's a Tidal Wave button where you can just send your collection over there. With this, you get all sorts of, you know, just different information from your library. So I can see how many items I have, the average age, am I okay with my number of books per student? Also, the number of books that we have in print and digital is on here. And I know that Michelle mentioned this, but it's true in my library as well. Our students really want print formats. Also, digital items are really expensive. So we put a little bit of money each year towards our digital collection, but not too much. And so we just kind of build it a little bit so that there's some newer items in there, but we don't really focus in on it. Of that 2%, a decent amount are digital audiobooks, just so that we have that format option for students so they can listen to the book. Instead, we don't have playaways. Everything that I know about playaways is that they are a nightmare to keep up with. So we really just tend to focus in on our actual like digital audiobooks that they can access. Now, Permabound also has a collection analysis tool. So you can download your MARC records and upload them to Permabound. And so one of the nice things about Permabound, if you've used them before, you may know the Brown Brothers. And if you are wanting to do some collection analysis and you're not sure how to do it and how to get your files in or what format, they will show up and they will help you because they are amazing in that sense. And so it has a lot of the same analysis that Tidal Wave does, where you can look at copyright, you can look at the Dewey Decimal, you can say, okay, well, I only have 31 books in my 000 Dewey section. Is that okay? Am I okay with that? Do I need to focus on purchasing more? Or in my technology books, I have some aged items. Maybe I need to take a look at what those are. Are they obsolete at this point? So you can get a lot of really good information. I would say between Tidal Wave and Permabound, I think you get a lot of similar information. It's just whatever works best for you. And I didn't want to promote one company over the other today. Also, some good reports. I know they're talking about weeding in future webinars, but at some point you may need to get rid of things out of your library. I always like to look at my copy data and I like to sort it to see what has actually never been checked out and when did I get it. And so, yeah, I do have one of those books on my shelves that's over 20 years old and it's already been pulled after I ran this report. Now, teachers, when I started here, they told me that they did units on classics, so I kept some of those on the shelves. Well, they're definitely not being used. At a certain point, you need to take those out. So I just thought I would share one of the useful reports that I found with Tidal Wave, which is with Destiny, which is the title copy data. If you download the Excel, then you can just start sorting data, and that can take as much or as little time as you want it to, but it does give you kind of a quick and easy weeding list. Now a selection, I did mention that we need to have 2 positive professional reviews on both Permabound and Tidal Wave. I just wanted to show that if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you'll see those full text reviews. So, and they may not have absolutely everything listed, but it's a great place to start. And it's part of my process is to go and look on their websites when I'm searching for books and I'm trying to find my reviews. They also will show you that award information on Tidal Wave. If you can see, like, kind of at the middle, it says reviews and awards. If there's an award, it will list it there. And I can't quite remember where it's at on Permabound. Okay, I just realized.
Oh, sorry, I was going to tell you it's at the bottom, but no, that's the reviewing agencies. I forget where it is as well.
Okay. I'm just going to be honest. I use Goodreads. I do not use it for professional reviews, but I use it just to double check what does the populace say about this book. And so we've probably all watched a movie out there where the critics raved over it, and you're sitting there like, I really wasn't here for the cinematographic. I can't even say the words. I'm not here for that. I wanted to have a good time. Is it actually good? So I use Goodreads for that and use it pretty frequently. And I just kind of have my own personal cutoff, which is if it's below 3.75, is it really worth my money? And if it's, if I got it for free and it's below 3.25, is it worth my time processing it? So you can make those numbers up for yourself. It was a way with limited, at some point, your money is always going to be limited. And what should I purchase? What should take priority? Well, if it's below 3.75 on Goodreads, it probably doesn't have priority for me. So again, not a place for professional reviews, but it is another place to just kind of think about books. For vendor options, there are many, many out there. I can think of Bound to Say Bound and Gumdrop Books that may have more for elementary. But these are a lot of the ones that I tend to use. So Barnes & Noble, I can go in and I can look at the book. And for me, that's extremely important when I'm talking about graphic novels, that I can go in and put my hands on the book and flip through it. So you normally, with a school account, if you get set up with them, it's about a 20% discount and it goes to 30% if you're spending $1,000 or more. But all of those items are going to come with no processing. I know Michelle talked about that and just the time that it takes. I do have an assistant, and I know many, many libraries do not have that. And so we are well used to processing and we've got that down pat. But if your biggest issue is time, it might not be a great viable option. Amazon is the same way. There's not going to be processing. Depending on the schools, whether or not you can actually use Amazon. Now, they do accept POs now, but your school has to be set up in their business center. So that might be something where you want to investigate that within your district before you really spend any time actually building a cart in Amazon. No matter how much what you feel about them, though, you get them pretty quick. I had an order placed today. I will probably get, or I guess yesterday afternoon, I will probably get those books in my building on Friday. A lot of times they have some form of discount. If they don't, I normally put it on one of my other orders. Garrett Books, if you know Mike Reynolds, he tends to come around with totes of books and he will show those to you. Normally they're all brand new releases. They're nonfiction. There's some discount on them, but it's a limited selection with what he's offering you. And then if you need to have reviews to back that up, you are going to need to look those up and actually find out if they have reviews or not. Typically, they are well-reviewed books. And those books do come processed. Also, Permabound and Follett are very similar in how you're getting things. They have a large selection. You can look at the reviews right there on the site and build your cart without having to go back and forth. a slight discount across the board, very similar pricing, and then optional processing if you pay for it. And so that's the end of my actual presentation. So I'll come back to you guys and stop sharing if anyone has any questions.
There were a couple of questions in chat, Lisa. One of them was about the playaways. Ellie said she had just ordered two. My issue with playaways is keeping up with batteries, keeping up with headphones, because they're just the little corded in your ear headphones, so they're really easy to be lost or pocketed or mixed up or even just like torn. And so that's been my biggest issue with playaways, is it's just not worth trying to keep track of batteries, trying to keep track of the headphones. And I don't have a lot of kids that ask for them. But again, that may also be part of kind of that ebook where there's not a lot of selection for them because they are hard to maintain. So we don't order a lot of them.
In our district, the only sites that have playaways are elementary and intermediate. And a big part of that is they don't have one-to-one devices. And we do have one-to-one devices, 7th grade and up. Now, I was just at one of the intermediates this past week, and a student walked up and was getting a playaway, so she just went ahead and checked the battery as it was getting checked out. And I do know that there are forms you can fill out if they break, and you can send them in for repairs with, I think that was through Follett. Permabound may have something similar. I'm not sure because I have not personally used those. I know that Capstone Interactive has a lot of digital books that can be read aloud to the students, and that's more elementary. However, that does still require them to have some form of device to be able to access them.
Are you familiar with Wonder Books at all, Lisa? I'm not, so I can't speak to the difference between Wonder Books and playaways.
I am not, I'm sorry. And then as for the other question on ordering through Amazon, so I need to go back and just, I think I might have deleted a slide accidentally. Just talking about like some community options. I served on the Sequoia committee, so I received a lot of books, and primarily hardcover books when I was on that committee. And so we are just very used to processing our own books from scratch at the Freshman Academy. I feel like hardcover books and library bound are both they're pretty sturdy, and they're going to take a lot of wear. For paperback, like Michelle said, they don't last as long. There are items called like Ready Covers is one brand, and there's another brand where you can wrap the books in essentially plastic to extend the lives of books. So there's options. Just know that, again, if you order through something like Amazon, that you will need to process those. So, do you have Mylar? Can you purchase Mylar with your bond money? At Jinx, we've always kind of said, well, if it's part of binding and repair, it's staying with the physical book. So it is going to last the 5 years if that book lasts for 5 years. So we are able to use bond money with it. Other districts, bond money is really like books only. So that's something to think about with your funding sources, if you can purchase the binding and repair materials. But otherwise, I feel like hardcover is going to last just as well as library bound for the most part.
Yeah, I agree. I don't worry too much about the difference between library bound and hardcover, although both permabound and Follett, if they're permabound or Follett bound, they will typically replace those books for you if something happens. But within, like I said, our life, we're looking at a life of 5 years, so it's not a huge concern. I've found that the hardcover books hold up really just as well. In most cases, obviously, I'm not doing some tracking of the books to really be sure. But for the most part, just being a hardback books helps them to hold up a lot better.
And if you're purchasing it through Amazon specifically, since they don't have any sort of return policy, then I would just go honestly with the cheaper option. There is kind of a balance too of, can I replace this 3 times for the cost of the other version? And at a certain point, you may make that decision one way or the other.
Thank you. That's helpful. As I struggle, this is my first year and I want to make the most. I'm very much a cruncher when it comes to making the most of our money. And if there's a book on Amazon that's a hardcover that is, like you said, a third of the cost that I could buy a permabound for, I don't know, it's a struggle. But then I don't want to have to replace it in 4 years, even 5 years. Like ours is, I wish we had a bond, but we can't pass a bond in our district. So anyway, yeah, it is what it is.
Well, and there's a lot of people that their money sources really relies on Scholastic book fairs, and there's only so many hardcover books you can get from Scholastic. They have a lot of paperback, which is, I think, one of those things where it's like, it's going to cost about $1 to get the plastic covers. I purchased them from Demco. I'm sure library store somewhere else has them. But if that paperback book plus $1 processing compared to a hardcover book at double the cost, and you're still going to spend 50 cents processing, then if your real constraint is money, then, and you have the time, then you might consider those. I don't think it's going to show up on camera. I grabbed a paperback to try to show off the cover. I don't know, you can kind of see it's a little glossy, but that's something that we do all the time, just with.
I would say library bound is most valuable for your will not stay on the shelves book. So in elementary, from what I do know, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Dog Man, those books where they're going to just constantly be in and out. As soon as it's returned, somebody else is going to want it and it's really going to get heavy use. If I had the ability to order from Amazon and then get the plastic material, even though it is time consuming, I could probably find the time to get a few books done here and there. And so I definitely think, like Lisa said, it's a decent trade-off, and there are different plastic coverings. There's one that is I could kind of see on the book where it folds over, the plastic folds over the cover a little bit. There's also another that is more of a hard plastic panel that you cut exactly to the size of the cover, and so it just goes to the edge. That one is a stronger cover, but then the downside of that is it will sometimes start to split from the paper, or the cardboard of the cover will kind of start to split, and then you just end up taping it. But again, even that, I've had books where I just put some book tape over it and tape it, and if you cut it down pretty well and you smooth it out, you really can't tell the difference. So it's one of those, a balancing act of what do you have time for? What does your budget look like? What can you purchase? Also, I've gotten some books by literally just making an Amazon wish list or putting something on my social media and being like, hey, I really need this book, or I would love this book. And occasionally I'll get some books that way. But I would be very careful about asking for donations, because sometimes you get books that nobody wants, and that's why they're being donated to you. So I always try to give a list from Amazon or something.
If you do not have a budget, I would highly recommend that you look into the Sequoia Book Grant. I cannot guarantee that it's happening this year, but I know it happened last year and I was on a committee voting for that. But they have tons of books that the Sequoia Committee has gotten in that they are giving away. And so I would look into that. I mean, I believe if you're here, then you're an OKSL member, and so a member of OLA. And that is something that OLA puts out every year. So there's an option, hopefully, for some books for your library that maybe you can apply for that. Also apply for Sequoia if you have a time if you have any time availability, it's a lot of reading, but you get thousands of dollars of books for your library. Everything that comes in, you get to keep for your library. And that can be a really big boost if your main struggle with your library is having funding. Any other questions?
I have a question for you all. How much or do you all work with your local public libraries, maybe to get access to digital books or audio books for your students through the public library system? And how do you go about that if you do?
In TPS, all of our secondary students have Tulsa County Library accounts utilizing their student ID number. So I will usually a couple of times throughout the year do an activity or a lesson where we specifically pull up their digital resources or their books. And so that's one way. Prior to that, I just tried to keep the library's promotional materials in my library, but thankfully I didn't have to do that for very long, because about a semester into my first year is when we finally got the accounts that had apparently existed for a couple of years but did not actually get started, got going, and so we're able to utilize it that way.
We are served by Tulsa City-County Library, but we don't have those automatic library cards and we can't require kids get them. So we still promote them and, let kids know, like, okay, this is something that we don't have access to. It's not something I can send you to the high school for, but that the public library has it. They do have Sora, which you can sign up for as a district. Just so far, our district hasn't signed up for it.
Ours
We
hasn't
don't
either.
have full control over what is on Sora, and so there's some trade-off there. But local libraries are a great place of helping connect you to those digital resources. And if you don't have a ton of money to devote towards digital books, especially if you're not seeing the payoff in, I'm spending $75 for this ebook and it's not getting read. I mean, there's a lot of trade-off with digital content.
Yeah. I would also add that depending on the license of the ebook, you might be paying $75 for a single use 2-year copy of the book, depending. I know at the elementary level, a few years ago, my son's school had the City County Library come out and they gave out the library card forms. And so if you wanted one, you could send it in and the school took care of turning it in and they got their cards from school.
Any other questions? Oh, go ahead.
If there's not another question, can I show collections on Destiny really quick, just in case someone's not familiar with those?
Absolutely, please do.
Okay, let me see if I can share my Chrome. All right, can everyone hear me? I think it. Yes. So on Destiny, this is kind of how mine pops up. At the top, you'll see home and then collections. So if you click over to that and just scroll down, these are the ones for the Jinx Freshman Academy. And so these have pretty much come up just from what students are asking for or from projects that teachers do. We have several teachers that have them read a memoir or personal narrative. Sometimes manga can be difficult to find when you're looking online, so we just narrow it down to all the number ones. I don't read books that make me cry if I know they're going to make me cry, and so I'm really bad at giving recommendations. So we made that collection this year. I've got my free verse one. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on that one. And so as you get books in, you do have to kind of remember to add them to your collection. But then you'll see the book with just a brief summary. The one thing that you do kind of have to teach your kids is as they find a book that sounds interesting to them, you do have to actually click on it. And I think that might have taken me to another tab, so it's not sharing the screen, to see whether or not it's in or out. So that's the one downside to the collection, is that you can't see on this screen whether or not it's in or out. But we use those just to share a few different options that kids are really looking for, that they may be hard to find on the shelf, just because, you know, books that make you cry don't necessarily stand out.
Do you have to go to the Discover, or can you do that when you're cataloging a book, putting it in collections, or is that all in a separate spot?
So in back office, you can initially make a resource list, and then when you're building your collection, when you create a new one, you can import that. However, after that, you do have to go in through Discover. You just click on the book and there's like an add to collections option, and you click on which collection you want to add it to. The first collection that your students will see will be whatever has been added to the most recently. So I have teachers, or I have other librarians like at elementary levels, that they'll use it with different themes that they have, that their teachers are doing. So if they're doing a big animals research project, they can do that. So some of them are curriculum based, some of them are just student need.
Okay, so would you recommend just doing it in Discover? Would it save time? Like which is the most effective?
I think when you're starting off building a new collection, I would go ahead and build that resource list, because you can just do that whole search all. And then once it's built, you just kind of add them in one by one. So I have a little sticky note reminder like, hey, add these books to collections.
Okay.
And then, yeah, it started off with my LGBTQ books. I had my kids asking, hey, why don't these books just have rainbows on, you know, rainbow stickers on them? And so we started off as an easy way for them to find them. And it's just, I typically add 1 or 2 per year. So that's another thing I feel like with collection development and all of that stuff, is it takes time, and it's
So
really
I
easy.
assume you're not genreified then. Sorry.
So with my library, our fiction section is not genreified, but we do have genre stickers at the bottom of the book. So
Okay.
about right here on our fiction books will be a genre sticker.
Okay. So you can't, yes and no, but they're in their normal spot.
They're in their normal spot, but we do have indicators.
Nice. Okay. Thank you.
My library is the same way. The librarian before me last year had started the process of getting books labeled. So I have about a third of the fiction books that are labeled. And then once they are all labeled, because I do have such a small collection, it's a little bit more attainable for me to finish that relatively soon. Once they're all labeled, I will actually be moving the books that way. And that is what I had started at my previous library. Was they were the sublocation in Destiny was specific to the genre. They had the genre stickers on them and they were shelved in separate locations.
Yeah, the genres, like genreification in our district is very much a library by library decision. So we have some sites that are, some sites that are not. Some of the schools that feed into each other, so elementary to intermediate, have made decisions kind of based on what their students are going to find at the next level up or what they're already used to. But I at least like to have some sort of indicator for them.
Yes. Having an indicator is important, because so often that's what, when the kids come in, that they're just like, well, where are the mystery books? Where are the horror books? Where are the, you know, whatever. And I personally have found that it's not, wasn't a big issue to move them around, even though it created a little bit of extra work in the catalog, just because with having a digital catalog, looking up the book and very quickly seeing where it was so much easier. And I'm, even with like my nonfiction, I am working on moving to whole number Dewey, just because there are so many choices. And with kids using more online resources, the casual browsing is more how they find those nonfiction books. And so having them divided up in a better way would make more sense.
All right, I think that is our time for now. I just want to thank Michelle and Lisa both again. Very great job, wonderful job. I appreciate your perspectives, and it was wonderful kind of getting a peek into your libraries and the way things function. And it sounds like a lot of similarities, but also differences and just different perspectives on things. So we truly appreciate you giving your time to OKSL, and thank you very much. And those of you that joined us, we appreciate you, and be looking for the link to this presentation, and feel free to reach out to me. I'm the OKSL chair, and you got emails from me before, so you have my email address, and I'm willing to answer any questions that you have. So thank you very much and have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.